This is a rehearsal of a presentation that I'm going to be giving at the Undergraduate Linguistics Association of Britain Conference 2024. I'm going to throw in a couple extra elaborations that I won't be able to fit in my allotted 10 minutes, but were in my original assignment that I did during my undergrad, plus a couple extra things. This is not a discussion on the meaning of death, but a discussion on the meaning of death. What's the point of doing this? And to that question, I answer with another question. Why do we study linguistics? Well, we can't really do anything collaboratively without communicating. So from a perspective of optimization and efficacy, it's valuable. A personal tenet that I'm sure many others would also subscribe to is that nothing is rigid and context is everything. So it's important to understand how that efficacy of communication fluctuates between different times and spaces. We can use linguistics to understand the mind, perception, culture. Those things and more are represented and misrepresented. So it's important we have the literacy to not only recognize these distinctions and their motivations for characterizations, but also to delineate them clearly and explicitly for wider masses doing other important things to understand and hold misrepresenting actors accountable. Meaning makes us feel. It's a part of experiencing reality, so we should probably try to understand the processes of meaning transmission to enrich these moments of feeling further, to experience reality in a more enjoyable and less confusing or stressful way. Happiness is good. Suffering is bad. Death is inevitable. Therefore, if someone were to wish death onto another, it might seem redundant, right? You're gonna get it either way. Death is a natural part of the process of life, but it all too often is induced by processes and systems that are too difficult to immediately control at an individual level. In these cases, someone is robbed of experiencing reality to the fullest and longest potential, robbed of their autonomy to decide how much they've enjoyed their life and how ready they would be to leave it only after reaching and surpassing that maximum potential. Therefore, we often see death as a bad thing, as a form of suffering. When someone wishes death on another, they're wishing this robbery. They're wishing suffering. In spite of their apparent aggression, robbery is the opposite of what Knocked Loose are saying. On the 23rd of December 2022, screenwriter and despondent, hostile transphobe Graham Linehan's Twitter account was reinstated after almost 30 months of suspension. Linehan's Twitter has notably become a campaign against trans rights, invoking the rhetoric of actors on both individual level hate crime and government-led policy that result in murder, suicide, or emigration of trans folk from the UK. Many people were dismayed by the reinstatement, particularly those whose pro-transgender or anti-racist activism shared to Twitter had previously been removed or algorithmically downplayed. Disproportionate content moderation has led to an uncertainty among activist and non-activist Twitter users about the exact criteria that determines censorship, and also the function of Twitter. Twitter appears unusable because it thrives off of conflict, but it also doesn't want to hold itself accountable for the off-app ramifications of particularly explicit verbiage in conflict, like death threats. Hence, such tweets are removed, you would think. Since content moderation is not done manually, discussions of death in earnest fashion, even without the presence of conflict, are held to the same standard of critique as death threats, and as such are equally at risk of being removed. Despite the importance of context, content moderation is devoid of it. While some have resorted to whole-ass external programs to bypass social media censorship, others have been observed to substitute whole or alter the orthography of potentially sensitive words or phrases that have historically triggered tweet equivalent, or entire accounts takedowns. There's evidence for this not just in English, but in other languages too. In 2023, I conducted a study that aims to test a typology of linguistic innovations strategically avoiding censorship of the word kill and common synonyms by generating a small database that identified their frequency across selected regions and the conversational contexts yielding them. The class was about how we research dialects, and this focus on social media was undertaken to identify how users translate spoken dialect features into their written digital footprint. This sort of research is conducted to predict changes and observe social developments in spoken dialect patterns. However, online subcommunities often develop words, phrases, or multimodal memes as markers of identity, similarly to how various spoken dialect features function as an expression of geographical or cultural pride. A bulk of scholarship has therefore oriented itself around such communal online norms, forming linguistic variation that is geographically anchored to the internet. Sometimes the two fields have intertwined, such as the widespread appropriation of African American vernacular English. Despite the massive influence that Black culture at large has had on the Western digital culture that Twitter helps mediate, diaspora often being the origins of viral dances, songs, slang, food recipes, and more, Black cultural intermediaries have reported censorship of their content critiquing systems perpetuating xenophobia, including Twitter, while actually xenophobic rhetoric remains. What's actually going on here? Content maintenance on Twitter has two processes: curation and moderation. Content curation collects users' behavior and uses it as a foundation for recommending new content, while content moderation uses a separate set of criteria to prevent certain content from being recommended. The first example Twitter gives in their current policy of hateful conduct is "I will kill you" to demonstrate violent threats, which goes to show how important the word kill is to Twitter in its content moderation practice. However, they do not detail how their algorithms discriminate between the varying contexts in which kill may be used. This results in, as stated, earnest commentary on murder and the systems that contextualize and perpetuate it to get flagged and moderated alongside genuine threats. Not only that though, but uses of kill, murder, and suicide to show self-depreciative humor also technically do not flout Twitter's policy, but have similarly been taken down. A paper from the Association of Computing Machinery studying human-computer interaction categorized strategies that bypass content moderation's suspected list of keywords. Users employ a range of morphological, phonological, semantic, and optical tricks to a transmission to make them undetectable by content moderation, yet understandable for their intended audience. For example, they may substitute letters with other resemblant characters, such as kill with an exclamation mark instead of an I. You could effectively substitute every letter until the whole word was indistinguishable from the original, like vertical bar greater than 177. From the context of the sentence and the shared assumption that kill is flaggable, you can intuit that that's what that word is meant to mean, even if you can't identify the visual similarity straight away. This is an example of leet speak, which originated for similar reasons among hacker communities in the early 2000s. I wanted to study leet speak, and more importantly its successors, because of this idea of dialect being geographically anchored to the internet, and also because of two particular instances of this. The first being the wide phenomenon meme even that is unalive. The second is this bypassing technique arising from phonological similarity. It definitively implicates a threat, and so shows that evasion strategies are not limited to people that are afraid or conscious of disproportionate content moderation. So what do? Something called scraping. Scraping involves getting a huge database of recorded transmissions and extracting all the ones that meet a certain criteria of your choosing to analyze patterns between them. So we could use Twitter as a database for linguistic items, aka a corpus, because so many people use it to not only candidly make evidence their spoken dialect, but to also innovate this internet dialect that I've been speaking of. You effectively control F all of Twitter and identify patterns between different tweets that use the same word that you're looking for. These patterns can be across the typed content of the tweets, but also in their metadata. So we scraped Twitter for the word unalive just to check we knew how to do it and what kind of results we would get. Then to come up with some other probable examples, we made a survey for students to reformulate sentences containing kill, murder, or commit suicide in contexts of varying severity and irony, under the assumption that such words and phrases would flag their imaginary social media accounts to content moderators and be taken down. Plus, it was noted in the prompts that the words were only flaggable when spelled exactly as how the prompt presented them, which was their standard spelling in all kinds of cases. Answers that utilize strategies described by Kim et al.'s paper for the Association of Computing Machinery were then used for the scrape. We also put English only and in content only parameters to prevent picking up tweets from users that incidentally had evasion strategies in their usernames but not the tweets themselves, as well as non-English leet speak or unintended leet speak presenting items. These are like coincidental emoji bake, which is what you get when emoji or other specialized characters don't translate well between devices or platforms. Tweets and the metadata were formatted into like a spreadsheet, and then we manually combed them for. It has been suggested that linguists researching social media use should implement the same ethical safeguards one would when disclosing sensitive in-person data, which is especially relevant when studying candid admissions, anxieties, or ignorance about emotionally and politically sensitive topics. As such, anything deemed too graphic, such as legitimate or deeply described violence or suicidal ideation, was not considered for analysis or representation. I should probably tell you what I found too. Ta-da! There were some unsuccessful results. Some didn't return much usable intelligible data, and others ended up not being evasion strategies, rather reflections of spoken markers of cultural identity, which formulated a mini study in and of itself, which was cool. I'll talk about those elsewhere. While Sueyslide didn't give us much, suicide, where the first two syllables of the innovated word are substituted for the phonologically similar canonical word sewer, did come up. What's interesting is that the word commit is not altered when placed next to it. Jade's tweets, for example, use the sensor-conscious suicide, despite also using commit and the unaltered flaggable murder. It's like Kermit's can only arise in a meme-tinged context. Kermit Sueyslide, by comparison, phonologically innovates suicide with a semantically exaggerative quality, also helped by for real. It appears both strategies also have an illocutionary element of sarcasm or meta-irony to alleviate the severity of the claim. The illocutionary force is like an implied suggested meaning tied more to the intention than what is literally said. Like in an English-speaking culture, saying oh, it's so cold in here may contextually also relate to maybe a window needing to be closed or the listener needing to hand over their sweater or something. Wait, I'm going off on a tangent. Kermit Sueyslide conveys the literal demand, the absurdism of meme culture, and the kinship between the interlocutors over that. The signification of sewer in a context where sewers are not relevant also likely conveys this absurdism. Haha, so random! Unalive arguably captures this even more, probably from the combined apparent meaninglessness of morphologically negating the word alive via a prefix, despite alive already having a popular negated form, which is dead. Then using an adjective instead of a verb is kind of silly too, so it gets used in place of kill. Sueyslide, suicide, and unalive, therefore, are innovating multi-dimensionally, not only morphologically and phonologically in representing other words, but simultaneously engaging with contemporary meme aesthetics, which is often self-referential, indicating a shared awareness of shifting language norms of Twitter as an environment. There are uses of suicide that don't intend to evoke this pragmatic information given their more sincere nature, such as the common trigger warning format. In these sincere contexts though, other evasion strategies that don't have these mimetic associations were preferred. The same goes for kill alternatives via optical tricks. These were common across the entire corpus, appearing even in scrapes of items that were falling under other categories. Regarding sincerity, suicide and kill were used sincerely in almost every transmission in which they appeared. Only 8% of all kill uses marked exaggeration and or humor. Meanwhile, EliteSpeak KI77 data revealed nearly the opposite, where 13% of contexts were in sincere specific reference to murder. Uses of KI77 with its weakened intensity were usually in reference to parasocial relationships discussing celebrities or objects to whom the authors were constantly exposed. The knife emoji was spotted in similar contexts. Semantically and syntactically, this is a weird one. On top of the meme stuff, unalive is pretty robust. It can be used as a verb, adjective, and also a noun. It can also signify the same thing in multiple ways. A substitution for suicide could be flat unalive, or the even more nonsensical unalive myself. This isn't the same for the knife emoji, which is limited to only being a transitive verb. Transitive verbs require a doer and a receiver of the action, but the knife emoji never appears reflexively like unalive, where the doer and the receiver are the same person. At least I didn't collect any uses of someone saying they were going to knife emoji themselves. But what can we do with this data? Why is it significant? The study I did corroborated the typology put forward by Kim et al. And now we can put on the formal record or academic canon or whatever you want to call it, the presence and purposes of unalive and similar variables. The phrases kill myself and commit suicide have lost their intensity and meaning as they've become overused to express embarrassment or other negative emotion. Carp, who censors killing with vowel substitution to get kaling, is probably not actually considering suicide because they're angry with a video game. Right? We may have known this already, but now we know new ways of how people weaken the intensity of a word or phrase's meaning. We could use this method to study other words that people change so that they don't get erased from social media too. We should probably start looking at the illocutionary force potential of the knife emoji as an extension on the topic of violence rather than an explicit reference, as well as how it is modified via processes such as flooding, where an emoji is repeated for emphasis. There's also the role of meta-discursivity plus the pervasiveness and appropriation of AAVE in usage too. 2022. What I'm personally interested in is the role of multimodality in transmissions hosting evasion strategies. Here's a screenshot of a TikTok that uses the text, emoji, video, and audio modes to talk about suicide without malice, and in it we can see 2 censorship evasion strategies straight away. Interestingly though, this kind of multimodality is not always harmonious or motivated by censorship evasion either. I've seen similar TikToks where the closed captioning will use unalive, but the word actually coming out of the speaker's mouth is kill or commit suicide. There's a section in Big Joel's video, Conservative Comedy Destroyed My Life, where he censors profanity from the film Team America World Police because he's
trying to keep this video monetized,
but uses other words like fuck. Is that not considered as or more profane than the words that Joel is censoring? Or is he trying to keep this video monetized by making substantial changes to the source video so that it falls under fair use? It is multimodally intriguing to me. To conclude the conclusions, this is a useful way to discern the differences between stuff that should and shouldn't be susceptible to censorship and the importance of manual content moderation. About a week after I received feedback for this assignment, Elon Musk closed public access to Twitter's APIs, the tool on the Twitter side of data extraction, which means no more linguistic study with Twitter data. Yay! As valid as Mastodon and Blue Sky seem as alternatives for study, they're nowhere near as large and in-depth as Twitter simply because they're younger, so the results aren't going to be as thorough. Data could also be skewed, as these websites attract a demographic that is a minority under the grander Twitter user base, characterized specifically by being opposed to Blue Sky is now letting their users customize how their own personal feeds are moderated, which will eliminate the need to think of evasion strategies, which is good. It would be actually interesting to see if and how any of these evasion strategies like unalive persist despite their lack of necessity. Nevertheless, the Blue Sky user base is dwarfed by the phlegmatic majority who will continue to use Twitter until it or they die. Why did he do this? That's not a rhetorical question either. I have answers. Scraping Twitter data makes it easier to teach Twitter bots how to behave more humanly, and at first I thought this was the reason given Elon's ambivalent stance around the subject. But going back to this project for the ULAB conference made me realize Twitter is almost paradoxically more profitable without manual content moderation. I said it at the start. The more fights that Twitter encourages, the more attention is given to it, and therefore more revenue is generated from selling ad space in feeds. It's why Instagram's ads for threads always show tweets or threads that have inflammatory content in them. It's supposed to get you to download the app and dunk on those stupid people, which is not a productive use of your time. People that start legitimate discussions on Twitter eventually move away from Twitter to have them because Twitter is not a suitable medium for them. By putting down attempts at legitimate discourse, people aren't compelled to think away from Twitter, so they stay on Twitter. By promoting opportunities for reductive dunk sessions on Twitter, people are compelled to think and stay there. We can't research this now, which makes it harder to understand Twitter as a subculture and understand how it and real broader cultures are represented and misrepresented. This prevents us from delineating representations and misrepresentations of cultures in a clear and explicit way to hold misrepresenting actors accountable.
The only way you can take down the system is through violence, 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 violence.
Maybe there is another way to study culture with corpus data as rich and accessible as previously Twitter. Maybe there is a way to study online culture so that the research isn't antiquated by the time it's published, because memes move fast and peer review moves slow. Maybe one day we can talk about meaningful things in accessible online spaces without the other person telling us the vertical bar greater than 177 open parentheses close parentheses v vertical bar hyphen 531 backslash forward slash euro sign section sign. We should aim to use social media to induce those meaningful moments that make us wise and happy. For suffering is bad. Happiness is good. Done.